Welcome to Tucker Carlson today. So the insanity on campus really is a bottomless well. You could devote yourself entirely to telling stories of people who are crushed, trying to exercise their right of free speech. We spend our lives hearing those stories, and we try to go through them, winnow through them, to find the best, the most revealing, the most interesting. We have not, to this point, seen a story that so clearly reveals the competing worldviews here, that contains such clear statements of immutable principles we should be defending as a country, as this story does. It's the story of Professor Dorian Abbott. He's an associate professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago. He got his undergraduate degree at Harvard in physics. Like me, he has a PhD from Harvard in applied math. And he's had an amazing, that was a joke, of course, had an amazing experience over the last year. So the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, recently canceled a lecture that Abbott was about to give later this month because he was being criticized heavily on social media for his views, not even his political views, but his philosophical views. So he responded by writing an op-ed, co-authoring an op-ed in Newsweek in August that kind of laid out what was at stake. We are very happy to have Professor Abbott join us in the studio today. Professor, thanks so much.
Mr. Carlson, thank you for having me.
So what's so interesting about this, you've seen a lot of different, and trust me, just given what we do, we hear from a lot of different people. I don't think I've ever seen a college professor lay out in such clear, and I will say gentle terms, as you did, what's at stake. So here's how I want to put up a statement. I don't know if we have this for the screen, but you took the time to write out a statement of your own personal values and how you operate as a professor, a teaching professor. And you wrote this: I practice fair admissions. I select students and postdocs on the basis of scientific ability and promise. And I do not discriminate against any applicant based on anything else, period. I encourage freedom of expression and the creative exploration of ideas in my group.
That's exactly right. And I value diversity.
Yes.
I've advised a number of people from various different races, people of color, people white, foreign students,
Sure.
American students, men, women. It doesn't matter to me. But what's important to me is that everyone be given a fair chance.
Yes. But I select on the basis of scientific ability. Now, you're teaching and doing research, I think, at the highest level this country offers. I mean, based on your credentials, and we mock credentials a lot because most of them are hollow. But you know, a PhD in applied math.
It's not about credentials. It's about the product.
Well, but certain not all credentials are the same. You know what I mean? If I'm a doctor of sociology, a little different from having a PhD in applied math. And the promise of the hard sciences is they are quantifiable, they're measurable, that you can actually sort of determine someone's ability without reference to his race, for example.
Well, what's critical is the empirical test.
Right, exactly.
So if I develop theory, I'm a theorist. If I develop theory, I make a prediction and somebody tests it. And I'm wrong sometimes. I'm actually wrong a lot. It's okay to be wrong as long as you're being creative and coming up with new ideas.
Right. So you've summarized in your statement of values and in the sentence that you just uttered, kind of the promise of science, of education, really of a free society.
Yeah.
Nothing you're saying is controversial or different from what I assumed everyone believed growing up in this country, but it is different from what people now believe. So tell us your story. Tell us what happened, how you wound up here today.
Well, so a year ago, I was uncomfortable with how things were going on campus and off campus.
At the University of Chicago.
At the University of Chicago and in Chicago.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is I was uncomfortable with ideologies that discourage discourse, because when you can't speak with the other side, the only recourse is violence.
Yes.
And I saw that playing out in the summer of 2020. And so that made me uncomfortable. And then on campus, I was uncomfortable with the variety of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that to me appeared to be discriminating against certain groups of people. And I felt that didn't treat them as individuals worthy of dignity and respect. And to me, that has to be the fundamentals of any moral system that we're implementing.
Yes, that individuals have value as individuals, as distinct from their group identity.
Exactly. So I think that's something that we can't abandon, even though I think it's important to help the disadvantaged people.
Yes.
So things that I do, I've taught in a program a night high school for people who've been imprisoned.
Yes.
And who are now out of prison. I regularly work with the homeless almost every week. These are very important things to me. I love working with students who are disadvantaged as well, but we have to ultimately treat every person as an individual, and we can't, I'm not comfortable at a university with saying, well, you're an Asian student, so we're not going to give you the same chance as some other student.
Right. I will say you don't have to answer or not. You sound like a believer in the way that you live. You don't have to say if you are or not, but if you are, you're credit to whatever belief you hold. Okay, so you're expressing once again views that were the basis of our society like 20 minutes ago. So did you say any of this out loud? Apparently you did.
Yeah, so I was self-censoring for a while. I was uncomfortable, but I also understood that it was a dangerous thing to speak out on these issues. I could see what was going around. I saw how people were talking about them. And in the fall of 2020, I stopped self-censoring. And so what initially happened was I asked to give a lecture. Someone gave a lecture in an internal science seminar that we have in our department that was advocating the sort of social justice position, which is fine. People should be allowed to advocate whatever position they want. That's part of academic freedom. I asked to give a response the next week, and I was told that I couldn't give my response, which I felt that was unfair. So I recorded a short...
Let me just pause and ask, how did they explain that one side's allowed to talk?
There's always technical reasons that are given, right? So whenever anyone says anything to you, you have to understand whether they're giving you the reason or the excuse.
Right.
And in this case, the reason was that the people making this decision knew that it would be a controversial thing to express these viewpoints. The excuse was, we randomly select our speaker for this internal seminar, and it's not your turn this week. So what I did was I just recorded a 5-minute video making these points and put on YouTube and shared it with the department. Now, I thought YouTube is a way that I share material with my classes.
Yes.
It's a way so you don't have to send a large video file.
I'm so sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm not doing my job. What do you teach? Like, just root us in your day-to-day reality. What do you do for a living? Exactly?
Yeah, so what I do is I run a research group. My research group it contains graduate students, postdocs, and some undergraduates. What we are mostly focused on right now is planets, other planets, particularly extrasolar planets, planets orbiting different stars.
Yes.
We're interested in which ones could potentially host life. We've discovered thousands of these extrasolar planets. It's a very exciting time to be in that field. And in the next, hopefully 10 years, we'll start to get some indication of which ones could have life. And the next 50 years, we'll get much more indication. We'll start to put quantitative constraints on the prevalence of life in the universe. So we'll either find some, or we'll be able to say it's so-and-so rare. Of course, we won't be able to say it's a 1 in a million rare, because it's hard to prove something doesn't exist.
Right.
But we might be able to say, well, it's a 1 in 10 rare, or less, that kind of a thing. That's sort of what we're working on. And our role is theoretical calculations of atmospheric and oceanic fluid dynamics and radiative transfer in the atmosphere to try to predict which planets will have the conditions necessary to allow life.
Well, that would be its own super interesting conversation. Maybe we should be talking about that. That's interesting. But so we've just established that your profession, what you do for a living, does not intersect with American politics or cultural trends really at all.
Nothing. And in fact, to me, this sort of science is supposed to be a secret garden where you can retreat from all those type of activities.
Yes.
But over the last 5 to 10 years, everything has been introduced into the science. And so there's been a politicization of science.
And this is the hardest of the hard sciences. This is not sociology.
Yeah.
Not to be mean to sociology, but this is different from that.
So when I was an undergraduate, around the turn of the century, there were, in the dining hall, we would hear some of this, my physics buddies, we would hear what some of these other people were saying. It was sort of like a funny
Did all
joke.
the physics guys eat together?
Yeah, it's a nerd club. And so we would hear what was, I guess, sociology, anthropology. A lot of these fields were infected first.
Yes.
And we would hear what they were saying, and it was just funny and silly. It was like, oh, I'm glad I'm studying physics. But we never thought that it would come for us. And now here we are 20 years later, and it has come for us.
I got to be honest. I cover this stuff for a living. I spent my whole life looking at this stuff. I never imagined that it would get to your department or departments like yours, because
Yeah.
it just doesn't have any connection at all to what you do, right?
No, nothing.
Again, one more digression. You're not the only professor in this department,
Yeah.
or who's got this worldview, science-oriented worldview. What do the other professors think?
Well, so what you have to understand is that you become a tenured faculty member at a place like the University of Chicago by putting your head down and not caring about anything else except for your science.
Yes.
And so that's the mode that most of the faculty in my department and in other departments that are similar around the country are in the sciences. And so they just want to ignore this stuff and move on and, get their grants and get the science done that they're really excited about. Build the next cool laser. They don't
Right.
care about this stuff. But the problem is that there's a small group that's extremely committed. You could call them the woke activists or the social justice activists. And they're willing to spend all their time on this stuff, and they sort of steamroll everybody else. And so it's a way that a group that commands maybe 10% of the support on campus can end up defining what direction science departments go.
Yes. This is like the Bolshevik Revolution. No one really supported it, but they took over the country. So that a committed minority can control an apathetic majority pretty easily.
It's true, and that can make you feel pessimistic, but it can also be a cause for hope, because it means that if only a few of us start standing up and asserting principles of academic freedom, then maybe we can turn the tide.
Yes, well, that's the premise of this show, of my worldview. I really hope that that's true. I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is true. So what are the ways that this ideology started to intrude on your department and your science?
Well, so in my particular field of science, it's mostly coming through this diversity, equity, and inclusion, these offices and these administrators. So the schools have all hired large numbers of administrators and deans of diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. And it acts as a sort of a Trojan horse for the woke ideology to get into the hard sciences. There's actually a book I want to mention to you and your viewers. It's called Counter Wokecraft. It's written by a professor named Charles Pincourt. That's his pen name. He's not even comfortable saying his real name, but he documents what he's seen of a sort of a tactical manual of how the woke operate in a university department and his suggested counter tactics. And so it's a way that you could get into this in more detail than I could possibly do in 1 hour.
That sounds like a worthy book. Tell us, just in your day-to-day experience, so you're studying other planets outside of our solar system to assess their suitability for life. How exactly does the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff affect you?
Well, how it ended up affecting me was I was sitting on a number of committees where I felt that the discussions were not treating each applicant as an individual worthy of dignity and respect. That certain applicants were being written off or dismissed based on their immutable characteristics. And that's how it entered my life.
Okay, so
as a moral issue,
at the point where but to be clear, so at the point where you bring in postdocs or students you're going to teach
and faculty,
and faculty,
yes,
okay.
And faculty. So I felt that as a moral issue, I couldn't remain silent on this in good conscience.
It's a big step to speak up about something like this. Did you talk it through with your wife?
I did talk it through with my wife, and actually, I talked it through with my wife. I'd been telling her what had been happening, and she's born in Ukraine at the very end of the Soviet period, 1989. She still had to be baptized in secret, because if the government had found out that her mother was a Christian, she would have lost her job. So that's what happens when you end up having ideologies controlling education. And what she said to me was, from what you're telling me, it reminds me of what my mother told me about Soviet times. And people had trouble when they spoke out. Are you sure you won't have trouble? And what I said to her was, if that's what it reminds you of, if I have trouble or not, I need to speak out.
Good for you. Was she impressed? Did she support your decision?
My wife did support my decision. And at first, I was a little worried I was going to lose my job. And I talked to her about it, and she said, I've known hunger. I've known being cold and not having clothes to wear and not having heating. And I know I don't have to worry about that in this country. And so whatever happens, I'm with you, and we'll survive.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a very strong person.
Apparently. Well, that is support.
Yeah.
So with that support at home, at the core of your life in your marriage, you move forward to tell the truth.
And try to tell the truth as I see it, yes.
Yes, exactly. So you make, and I've interrupted you 9 times, I'll stop. You make this YouTube video, and what do you say?
Well, essentially, I mean, I tried to go through some of these issues that I had seen coming up. And so one point that I made was that there are effectively quotas being put on Asian Americans. It's done in a roundabout way, but there seem to be quotas being put on Asian Americans. You can see that in the lawsuit of Asian Americans against Harvard.
Yes.
This reminds me of what happened in the mid-20th century to Jewish Americans.
Yes.
And it's something I'm not comfortable with. We all agree that that was wrong, so why don't we see that this is wrong? Another thing I said is, if we care about diversity and inclusivity, why is it that a conservative Christian person on campus doesn't feel welcome and that their viewpoints are not considered a part of the diversity of our campus experience? So I didn't deny the importance of diversity because I think it is important. We should have people with different perspectives on campus. Yes. But I just felt that these words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, weren't being lived up to, and that the ideology that was accompanying the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs was harmful in many ways. The other point I made is, what do you think the purpose of a great university is? I'm asking you.
To impart knowledge and to train people to think systematically, which is to say skeptically, logically, to follow.
Yeah, so that's the secondary purpose. What do you think the primary purpose is?
To train our ruling class.
The primary purpose of a university, according to academics, is to produce new knowledge. The secondary purpose is
to produce knowledge, right?
Is
so
to transmit
the research part.
Is to transmit that knowledge as a secondary purpose. And so I pointed this out, and I said, I think these programs are inconsistent with that primary purpose. The primary purpose of a university is not social justice activism. It's producing new knowledge. And even when that knowledge is inconsistent with your particular ideology, we have to accept it and try to build out our knowledge base, including it.
Well, that's about as clear as it gets. So you post this on YouTube.
Yeah.
And what happens?
Well, so I've later discovered that there's a sort of a mechanism. There's almost like a playbook to try to take someone down who disagrees with the ideology. So the first thing that happens is people go on Twitter and they organize and they write lots of messages about the person. And the messages say mean things. So they'll say, this is racist, bigoted, white supremacist, like very scary sounding things. And then the other thing that they do is they claim that they've been harmed, that people are in danger because of this, and that the speech is a type of violence. So all of this happens on social media and it gets shared around. And the goal is to manipulate the administrator, the decision maker, into making the decision that the activists want. And so there's 3 parties in any of these cancellation disputes. There's the scholar, the political activist, and the decision maker, usually
Yes.
a department chair or a university president or a dean. And so the activists are very effective at manipulating that decision maker using these scary sounding words. The decision maker is usually a well-meaning, middle-aged, center-left person who believes in liberal values, but also cares about people and is susceptible to this type of manipulation. And so that's what happened. And then this culminated in a letter of denunciation against me that was signed by 70 young people in my department, students and postdocs, trying to get me to restrict my teaching, my ability to do research, and then also attempting to accomplish other goals in their program. So, for example, at the University of Chicago, we have a document called the Shills Report, which is about 50 years old and is used as almost like our constitution for hiring and promotion for faculty. And this document requires that only merit be taken into account. So one of the demands was to have this document ripped up and not use it anymore. So it can be fairly explicit in terms of trying to affect certain outcomes. There's no hiddenness about being against merit. It's very upfront. in a campaign like this.
University of Chicago is a little bit different, very different from a lot of schools in that it has this generational reputation as a place that is a meritocracy, and that is a serious place as a result.
Well, so that's actually how UChicago got on the scene.
Right.
So there was an era when Jews were being discriminated against.
Yes.
And UChicago said, we're not discriminating against anyone. And as a result, they got a lot of really good people who other places weren't taking. And that's how, in the 20th century, it got up to the same level as the Ivy League schools.
So to a greater extent than in most campuses, that's the identity of the school.
That's true.
This is a meritocratic institution.
Yes, there's actually 3 documents I'd like to tell you about. One is the Shills report that we have, which is about merit-based hiring. The second is the Chicago Principles, which is a document about 10 years old. And essentially it says, even if someone's saying something that the majority of people on campus consider wrong-headed, incorrect, immoral, whatever, we still have to hear them out. We have to allow them to deliver lectures and to publish. We can't have a moral judgment on who gets to speak on campus, and we certainly can't have it determined by a majority vote. People have to be exposed to different viewpoints. And the third thing I'd like to tell you about, which is very important for academic freedom, and it's often neglected. So everyone knows about the Chicago Principles, but there's also something we have called the Calvin Report, which was from the late 1960s in the Vietnam era. And what the Calvin Report does is it tries to ensure institutional neutrality. So for any major social and political issue, like pick one, abortion, it says that the university cannot take a definitive stance for or against. Neither the university corporate as a body, the president, the provost, the deans, or the department chairs cannot take a definitive stance for or against, because to do so would be to censure any scholar who disagrees and to say that we have a majority opinion. And so that would discourage the academic freedom of that scholar. And it would discourage our ability to accomplish our mission, which is to produce new knowledge. Because knowledge isn't produced by majority vote. You know, sometimes it's what everyone thinks is a crank is the guy who has the right scientific theory.
Yeah, Galileo.
Yeah, is an example.
Yeah, and many others.
There's many examples.
Many examples. And that's true in the arts, too, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of incubating genius and of creating institutions that protect people with unpopular views. Okay, so it sounds like if there's any school in America that had the firewalls in place to protect your dissent, it would be Chicago.
Yes. And so what happened as a result of this was there was sort of wishy-washy behavior from mid-level administrators. But the university president stepped in and issued a strong statement and just said, our scholars can express their opinions any way they want, in any forum they want, and we are not going to punish anyone for that. And that died down at UChicago.
Good
that
for
was the end
him.
Of it. His name is President Zimmer.
Yes.
He's been a stalwart defender of academic freedom.
I know he has, and probably not gotten the credit he deserves.
No, he has not gotten the credit he deserves.
It cannot be easy being him.
He's gotten a lot of hatred for the stances he's taken, in fact.
Well, bless him for doing that. What about within your department?
Well, within my department, the department is bifurcated. There is a camp that believes in academic freedom and a camp that might pay lip service to academic freedom, but uses language involving harm to try to limit what other people would say.
Were you physically assaulting a lot of students?
No.
Sorry. You're obviously as a compliment, such a gentle person. It's just very obvious that you've lived your life in science and you don't seem like someone who's beating your
there's no physical harm happening. There's no aggression. It's all language. It's just expressing. Essentially, the claim is that by expressing my opinion, I have aggressed against people who are in some sort of oppressed or underprivileged group, defined in some way.
It seems like the opposite is happening. It seems like people are expressing a lot of aggression toward you.
I don't want to make myself out as the victim.
No, I get it, but it just the inversion of language fascinates me.
It's interesting.
It's often the exact opposite, the mirror image of what's really happening. Okay, so there you are, you put this
Yeah.
out, they attack you on social media as an abuser and a white supremacist or whatever, an evil man. But the president of the university stands
Yes.
effectively on your side.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, so during this period, I said, "What? I just got hit with a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
What the heck was that?" I thought I was just saying what everybody believed, and they tried to squash me and ruin my career. What happened?
Yeah.
And so I start reaching out to different people. Lee Jussum reached out to me. He's a professor of psychology, and he was teaching a course on these issues at Rutgers. And he said, "Oh, will you attend our course and tell us what happened?" It's sort of a case study. And then I ended up continuing to attend his course. It was all on Zoom because it was coronavirus time.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot, and I made other connections. I was asked to join the Academic Freedom Alliance, which is a new group that supports academic freedom. Professor Robert George at Princeton is one of the leaders of this group.
Yeah.
I was already a part of the Heterodox Academy. I got involved with FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and
Yes.
Education. I met with some of the leadership at ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. I started networking and trying to understand what had happened and how I can be effective. And as part of this, there was a professor of business at Stanford. He's an expert in game theory. His name is Ivan Marinovich. And he organizes something called the Classical Liberalism Seminar. So classical liberalism is sort of a general theory that developed in the Anglosphere starting 200, 300 years ago. And it contains both what we call liberals and conservatives in this country. But it does not contain what we call woke or social justice, who are illiberal. They don't believe in liberalism. And liberalism basically involves talking together, offering evidence, discussing things, and making decisions in a rational way. And so he has this classical liberalism seminar that he organized in response to the craziness that's been happening. And it's a great seminar because they have controversial speakers, and it's only faculty who attend by invitation only. So everyone can trust who's there. It's about once a week. It's all faculty. There's about 50 people, and you can feel free to say whatever you think. So Yvonne and I started discussing things as part of this group, and we decided to write an op-ed expressing our opinions, and that's what published this summer in Newsweek.
Yes, in August.
In August, yes.
So in that, I want to put up a couple quotes from that piece that you co-wrote for Newsweek, because I think they, I'll just read them. If we could throw one of those up, I'll read it off the screen. Because I think you laid it out.
Yeah.
DEI violates the ethical and legal principles of equal treatment and entails treating people as members of a group rather than as individuals, repeating the mistake that made possible the atrocities of the 20th century. It requires being willing to tell an applicant, "I will ignore your merits and qualifications and deny you admission because you belong to the wrong group, and I have defined a more important social objective that justifies doing so." It treats persons as merely means to an end, giving primacy to a statistic over the individuality of a human being. So nicely expressed. When you put it that way, this is very dark.
Yeah, I think we're playing a dangerous game here. I think a fundamental aspect of legal and moral philosophy has to be that each human being is an individual worthy of dignity and respect. And when you abandon that principle, it's very dangerous.
Well, yeah, because as you said at the very outset, it's a short hop from there to physical violence.
Well, yeah, so that's the speech issue. So if a related issue, so I'm talking to you, right?
Right.
I'm aware that you sometimes say controversial things.
Right.
Okay? But I value you as an individual. You asked me to come talk about academic freedom.
Yes.
And I'm going to come talk to you because, we're going to talk man to man, and we're going to
Of course.
talk things over. Now, part of...
And you speaking to me is not the same as ratifying all of my different crazy opinions, which you may disagree with, but that's not the point.
If you didn't talk to everyone you disagreed with something on, you wouldn't talk to anyone.
Right.
So part of respecting someone else as an individual worthy of dignity and respect is allowing them to speak and then engaging with them in discourse. If you take away that, then if we have a disagreement, how can we settle that?
Well, exactly.
Just violence, yeah.
And I think inherent in that is allowing a person to explain what he thinks. people to describe their own views.
Exactly.
I mean, it would not be fair of me to say, Professor Abbott thinks this, that, and the other thing. Well, why don't I just ask him and let him describe what he thinks?
Yeah, so in these Twitter mobs, that's one of the tactics that gets used. And so they'll say, like, I read some of the things that they were writing about me, and I was like, that guy, he sounds terrible. Whoever said that, he's terrible. Who is that guy? But it had nothing to do with anything that I've said. So that's one of the tactics, because then once you've built up this straw man enemy, then you can knock him down easily.
Of course. Yes, I have lived this. Quite extensively, in fact. But, I'm not a scientist, and I haven't, spent my life studying applied mathematics or other planets. So it must be, I sort of expected maybe a little more than you. How did this affect your life, your circle of friends, your job? Like, you go from being famous among a small group of fellow experts to being kind of nationally known. Like, what happens then?
Well, I hope that I don't become prideful and that I can continue to live my life morally. And I know that's difficult when people know your name.
It is difficult when people know your name, but it's absolutely the right goal.
But certainly, it used to be that my theories were judged only on their theories, and I fear now that that may not be the case any longer. However, it's a small sacrifice to make compared to the sacrifices that other people have made for freedom.
Amen. I can feel the resolve in those words. How has it affected your friendships with people in the university?
Maybe I lost some friends and maybe I made some others. So
Yeah.
it's okay. I like the people who support me and want to talk about these issues seriously.
Yes. Non-scientific question, but what percentage, roughly, would you say of tenured professors at a place like Chicago fundamentally agree with you?
Depends what you mean.
Yeah.
So there's two issues at play here. The first issue is the criticisms that I've made of diversity and equity and inclusion programs. I don't know what the percentage is who agree with me on that on campus. What I do know is that according to a recent Pew poll, 74% of Americans agree with me. Okay,
Yes.
So that may not be true on campus, but 74% of Americans believe that when considering hiring and promotion, only relevant merit should be taken into account, even if it means less diversity, while at the same time, 75% of Americans think that diversity is important. So I do know that the views I'm expressing are held by a supermajority of Americans, which almost
Right.
nothing else is
Yes.
these days. So that's issue number one. But issue number two is the academic freedom issue.
Yes.
So whether you agree with me or not, do you agree that I should be able to speak? I would say, I hope that the majority of faculty agree with me on that, but I don't have the numbers to tell you for sure.
I guess what I'm asking is, have you had other professors take you aside or text you
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
bless you for what you're doing?
Yeah, so a very large number have. Very few have spoken out publicly, but I want to talk to you about someone who has.
Great.
So this is a man of very high integrity. His name is David Romps. He's a professor at Berkeley.
How do you spell his name? Romps?
R-O-M-P-S.
Romps, okay.
Yeah, he's a professor at Berkeley, and he was the director of a center, like a research center, which includes a number of faculty, maybe 10-ish faculty, a lot of grad students, postdocs, so 50 to 100 people in my field. And yesterday, he announced that he was resigning as the director of this center. And the reason is that, we're probably going to get to this, but I had a lecture canceled at MIT recently.
Yes.
The reason he's resigning is, as part of that, he asked the other faculty in his center if they could invite me instead of the MIT lecture as a statement of support for academic freedom. And apparently it became clear that not only would they agree to inviting me for this purpose, but they never wanted me invited on to Berkeley campus ever again. And he was so upset with this sort of violation of academic freedom that he resigned publicly. And he posted that on Twitter. And in just one day, more than 20,000 people have liked it. It's gotten 1,000 comments. He took a very brave stand that very few people are willing to in the modern climate.
Good for him.
Yeah.
So let's back up, and if you don't mind,
Yeah.
describing your experience with this lecture, which I'm proud to say was called the Carlson Lecture.
Yeah.
I'm not the smartest Swede out there. I don't know who it's named for, but what is the Carlson Lecture, and why were you asked
So this
to deliver
has been going for 10 years. There are a variety of different honors and types of recognition in an academic career. They're important for promotions. So I'm a tenured professor, but I'm an associate professor. So I got to get up to the next level. It's just kind of like silly games like everyone has in every field.
But does that determine your pay, for example?
Yeah, it affects your pay.
Yeah.
And, it can have some effect on your ability to get grants and things like that. And so as part of building your case up for getting those promotions, you can get these recognitions, like being invited to give a big lecture. And so the Carlson Lecture is one of them. Only the top people in the field are invited to do this. You give a large public lecture for like 500 people, and then you visit the department at MIT.
About your research?
About a outreach level of your research.
Okay.
So not about the cutting edge research, but about things that you can relate to the public in a coherent and interesting and engaging way.
Interesting.
And then you also give a technical lecture at MIT, and you visit for a week and meet with the faculty and students and discuss future research projects and things like that. So I was selected to give that lecture. I was supposed to give it, actually Thursday is when it would have been.
Now, just to be clear, that lecture had nothing to do with what we've been talking about.
Zero. Absolutely nothing. Couldn't be further away from it than anything.
Purely about your study of planets and other solar systems.
Yes, exactly. And actually, anyone would, I don't know when this is going to air, but it's going to be given at Princeton.
Wait, but why isn't it being given at MIT, which you think of as a very serious place?
Because there was another Twitter mob that was upset about my essay with Yvonne this summer. And in fact, after the essay on Twitter, a strategy developed. So you can actually watch the thinking of this group in process because they post it publicly on Twitter. And so the strategy developed as a way to increase the pressure on me and anyone else who might disagree with what's happening on campus. The strategy developed to never invite me to give seminars again and to find replacements of other people who could deliver a seminar on the subject areas that I have expertise in. And the reason that's important is because our scientific work we distribute through academic articles, but also through public lectures.
Yes.
That's how we get it out. And so it's a way to cripple someone's scientific career and put pressure on them not to speak out against what's going on.
So given that the complaints against you had nothing to do with the subject matter you've devoted your life studying,
Yeah.
nothing to do with your research, MIT can't possibly cave to that.
Yeah, well, so what happened was within a week of this Twitter storm, the department chair sent me an email and asked to talk. And I thought he was going to say, look, MIT defends academic freedom. We know that what you're going to talk about has nothing to do with your opinions on merit hiring. But we've got these students who are upset. And so we're going to explain to them that if they disrupt your lecture, they have the following penalties, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to have security, and we're going to go ahead with it. But instead, he said the lecture's canceled, and I was in shock. I didn't think that could happen. I didn't know we had gotten to that place as a society.
Well, describe the conversation. I mean, was he apologetic? Was he embarrassed?
I can't describe it in more detail than that because I may not be the best at picking up on emotions. And also, I was a little upset, so...
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just reminded of you and your physics friends
Exactly,
in the
yeah.
Harvard cafeteria.
We weren't talking about emotions.
Sorry. I'm not laughing at you. This is so
It's
great.
okay.
I really, look,
I'm proud to be a nerd.
I love that. I live in a humanities world. I never
Yeah.
meet anybody like you. But I'm so grateful you exist, or we wouldn't have, say, air travel. So, wow. So this administrator caved to the mob.
Yes,
Well, let me just ask this. Did the person prostrate himself before you and beg your forgiveness.
No.
Okay, so that's despicable, I would say. Now that's my view. I just got to read because I just want our viewers to understand the kind of person you are, which is to say a far better Christian than I'm capable of being. This is a tweet you sent out after the lecture was canceled. Quote, "I forgive the activists who led the campaign against me. Please do not attack them personally. They are fish swimming in a sea of moral confusion. Some of the responsibility for their behavior rests on their elders who have not helped them form properly." Boy, if that's not Christian forgiveness, I don't know what is. I'm really impressed that you were able to write that. My fingers would not type that, even if I told them to. They just wouldn't. So good for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I view this as an issue that some of these people who've gotten caught up in this woke stuff, they've grown up in a moral vacuum.
Yes.
And this is filling that for them. And so we all have responsibility for our actions, but we can have compassion for them because they've gotten sort of tricked
Yes.
by this propaganda that claims to be, it presents itself as advancing laudable moral goals, but in
Yes.
fact, it's a radical ideology that's dangerous for society.
Oh, absolutely. And you've made such a restrained but crystal clear case about its dangers and where this leads. So the MIT lecture is canceled. That's shocking. Forever changes my view of MIT, that the institution itself could allow this to happen, allow Twitter to determine its academic standards and to destroy academic freedom and speech. But you are now giving a lecture at Princeton. Please describe how that is happening.
Yeah, so part of this networking I did after my first run-in, through part of it I met Professor Robert George,
Yes.
who is a professor at Princeton, and he runs the Madison program there. They're mostly concerned with issues of constitutional law
Right.
and society and things like that. But they have a large range of topics that they can cover. And so I contacted him when this happened, and I said, "Wow, this is crazy." And he said, "Oh, yeah, this is not good." And he said, let us organize your lecture for you. So through the Madison program, we'll organize it on Zoom, and anyone can attend in the whole world. And so it was supposed to be a lecture to maybe 500 people, and there's now almost 10,000 signed up for it through the Madison program at Princeton.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so that's the sort of thing, as academics, we can support each other when someone is attacked, and we can reach out to the public and make it clear to people that we're not going to allow ourselves to be silenced by these sort of groups of ideologues.
This is the famous Robbie George
Yes.
at Princeton, who's been around for an awfully long time and is the professor of last resort for a lot of people who are in your position because
Yeah.
he's a decent and principled person. Will the lecture, I have to ask before I sign up for it personally, will it be about your specialty or will
It's the exact same thing I was going to give. And anyone who watches can see that it's just about science. It has nothing
Are
to do
there
with anything
10,000
else.
people who could understand it?
Yes, that's what it's designed for.
Oh, it is? Okay,
You
good.
could understand it. I hope you'll attend.
Actually, I will, because
Yeah.
the one regret I have in this conversation is what you do in your academic area sounds legitimately pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. It should be engaging, and anyone in the public should be able to enjoy it. You know, with any scientific lecture, when I attend a scientific lecture, I don't understand 100% of the things that are being said, but I designed it so that most of it, everyone should be able to understand.
Interesting. I've never used the phrase, quote, when I attend a scientific lecture. It's just never.
Well,
never
now you can.
uttered those words. So what's your plan? First of all, I just have to say again, I can't say it strongly enough. Thank you for your bravery, for your dedication to the bedrock principles of the country, without which we can't really continue.
Yeah.
Because I know this is kind of not what you wanted to be doing with your life,
Yeah.
or you would have been working in the Congress, right?
Yeah.
So what are your plans going forward?
I want to spend 80 to 90% of my time doing science
Yes.
long term, but I want to spend 10 to 20% of my time advocating for academic freedom. And so one idea I've been talking about with other faculty at UChicago is trying to start a center for a free society. And we would purposefully invite speakers who some people viewed as controversial, but we would require everyone to engage with them respectfully. We would also host fellows from a variety of different fields who have an interest in academic freedom or who have potentially suffered harms for expressing their opinions. And so the goal would be to promote academic freedom and connect that to the importance for a free society more generally.
Do you think University of Chicago would allow you to do that?
We'll see. I'm optimistic, but we'll see.
Amazing. You rarely meet people who are this fascinating and wonderful combination of legitimately tough and also kind. Not a lot of people like that running around. I mean, you are one of them.
Thank you.
So we are rooting for you.
Thank you.
We'll be watching. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank
for
you
this
so
conversation.
much, Mr.
Great.
Carlson, for giving me the opportunity to talk about
Oh, I
academic
love
freedom.
it. I love it. This has made me more hopeful than anything I've heard in a long time. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dorian Abbott is the name of the professor. Tucker Carlson Today is the name of this show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Nation. We will see you every weeknight, 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.